Okay, so I am Ben Adamson from Veeam Software. I know it's late in the day, so hopefully I'll be able to keep you all awake. What I want to do is sort of take the opportunity to do a little bit of an overview first of all, but then just focus in on a couple of pieces of software that we see can make a really big impact for you really quickly. And then we'll have plenty of time at the end for questions. So if there's any specific use cases in particular, or things that you want to focus in on, just have a think about that as we go along. Because we'll sort of show you lots of screenshots and how we do things and how things fit together. Because we are drastically different from most other backup solutions. So we'll just be trying to articulate that for you and let you sort of know where we fit. And hopefully that leads to lots of questions and discussion and a little bit of talk about, you know, maybe where you can see a bit of a fit there. Like that on my screen. Alright, so Veeam is a really drastically growing company. I'm not sure, you know, how many people here have sort of heard of Veeam, if not used it? Yeah, around the place. It's sort of, in Australia, the brand awareness has been growing a lot, and there's certainly been global recognition, but we're really starting to see a great deal of traction in Australia, in all the major cities, in terms of people just being able to take the product and run with it, and in terms of being able to sort of step in and really take advantage of a lot of the stuff that you've done already with virtualization. So all that stuff that you're already doing to make VMware and Hyper-V work for you really strongly, we're able to come in alongside that and really leverage a well-optimized virtualized environment to make sure that you're getting really good outcomes for backup as well. There's a lot of stuff here just about, you know, numbers of customers and all that kind of stuff. I'm not sure if you can quite make it out. I chose the wrong color grey, obviously. But numbers of VMs protected now has gone over 4 million globally. So there's a lot of virtual machines being backed up every single day with Veeam. In terms of our product set, we do have a pretty small suite of products, so we're focused very much on that backup and replication, which is the traditional sort of one that everyone's heard of. A lot of people have used the free product as well, and previously we did have a tool called FastSCP, which was all about migrating around within your VMware environment. All of that functionality is folded into the free version of Veeam Back-up now, so if we need to back up point-in-time VMs, move them around, we can still do that for free. But obviously we unlock a lot of really powerful functionality when we start to look at the fully licensed versions and deploying them in a smart way with the infrastructure that we've already got. On the other side, we have a bunch of monitoring tools. So we're looking at being able to understand what's going on primarily in the management suite in Veeam 1. We're primarily concerned about our backup infrastructure itself. So what's happening within Veeam Backup and Replication, and also what's happening with the hypervisor underneath that. Do we have issues with data store growth where we're going to have an issue with snapshotting? All of that stuff brought to the fore so that we can know that we're going to get stability and we're going to be able to ensure that with, you know, as little effort as possible we can just keep those backups rolling along. The management pack for System Center, for people who have System Center, Operations Manager and VMware, we're going to bridge that gap, so making sure that you've got full integration of the two. So that's a fairly niche product. It does require that you pretty much have those two items in your environment. So we're not going to focus too much on that today. What we're going to look at today is more the binding together of backup and replication in Veeam 1 to give us a nicely rounded solution in terms of backup and replication outcomes. Now, a lot of the feedback that we get around people working with their existing backup solutions is just around the number of people that are engaged with it and the amount of time that they're spending day to day in that engagement. So we hear feedback around the hours per day that are spent just to make sure that backups have run. If they haven't run, what do we have to do to remediate that? All of that work that's going on in terms of just making sure that backups have happened and restorable, and that's not really acceptable from most people's point of view. From most people's point of view, they want backup to take care of itself. It's not something that they want to have to interact with unless they need to do a restore. Okay, so a lot of what we do is focused around that outcome, about being able to set up a system where you can be confident that you're in a backed up and verified situation. You know that you're compliant with all of your own policies that are in place around that. And then when you restore, that you have really rich, deep options in terms of that restore. So I can restore a whole VM, I can restore a single item from an Exchange mailbox. All of that is in there. So the three core things that we sort of get from a lot of this feedback is that we're missing capabilities in terms of being able to align with that virtual infrastructure. So being able to really have the product leverage our investment in what we've already done and take advantage of the fact that, yeah, we're not running a bunch of physical machines anymore. We're not going to treat it all just as if it were physical servers in a rack. We're going to actually understand that we have a virtual data center, and that allows us to do some pretty cool stuff. Complexity, so again and again we come back to this thing, agent-based backup systems, a whole lot of touch points that you have to manage. Essentially having as many touch points within your backup product as you do operating systems or applications out there in the data center. Having to manage all of that. If we have issues with an agent on a machine, having to reboot that machine and have an outage for that. All of this stuff which just increases the touch between the backup product or the replication product and actual production, we sort of take a step back from a lot of that. So addressing that complexity. And another thing is cost, right? So being able to make a nice broad understanding of what your data center sits on, the hardware that it sits on, and we price based on that. We don't get granular into what applications do you have sitting on which operating systems, and we want you to have 5 agents because you've got SQL and Exchange and AD and all this on one server. We're just going to look at the hosts that you're backing up. So if you can load those hosts up and really take advantage of virtualization and get a really good ratio, you're going to get really good value for money there. So what we want to talk about today is that death of the babysitting. So when I thought of that, I was like, what that made me think of? I think of Don't Come On, the Babysitter's Dead. I've seen that movie back in the 80s. But really being able to think about the fact that at the moment, it really is a pretty tender process, right? It's one, we have a break, we have to go in, understand what's happened, why did the job fail? It's been running fine for 2 weeks, suddenly it's failing, we have to jump in and sort that out. It's such a common story. We want to do away with that completely and really have something set up where we can be confident and that we know that we've got that assurance, what happened when, but we're only stepping in where we have some kind of exception or we're trending towards some kind of issue. So with that, we'll step into a bit of an overview of the management suite. So increasingly from Veeam, this is the messaging that we're going to be putting forward, is that the 2 products together give you outcomes that far outweigh the benefit of either one or the other. And having backup and replication in there without Veeam 1 to give you the deep monitoring and reporting, you're really going to miss out on some great functionality there. Backup and replication on its own is awesome, does really amazing things. But in terms of being able to really take a step back from that babysitting and hopefully reduce the number of engineer hours you're using every single day, this will really sort of show you some pretty strong stuff around that. So, I'm off the top of the thing a little bit, but so just back up my VMs, just back them up. That's all I want. I don't want to have to do a whole lot of stuff. I don't want to have to adjust my vSphere environment. I don't want to have to go into every operating system and set up an agent. I don't want to have to know that this server has SQL, that one has Exchange, whatever. I just want to be able to say, Veeam server, here is my virtual infrastructure. Can you please just go and back it up for me? There might be a few VMs that I don't want to back up. Cool, I'll exclude those. But we're doing all of that through a very small number of touch points. So we can see here the VMware Backup Proxy. That's our sort of equivalent of an agent, although it's not really an agent. But anyone who's used to a product like where you're having to have agents, so you'll have a whole number of things there. For every Exchange server, there'll be an Exchange agent. For every SQL server, there'll be an SQL agent. Dozens of agents. We have that one point of contact that we need to keep up to date. We need to keep that working, but it doesn't even sit within any of the VMs that we're backing up. So if we have an issue with it, we're not going to have an impact on production. We can troubleshoot that alongside, and people can keep doing what they need to do. So a vast simplification there. We're able to select what we back up based on containers. So we're able to say, backup, in this case, we're saying backup my whole vCenter, everything that's detected underneath my vCenter. If anyone creates any VMs that fall within that vCenter, back them up as part of this job. So we're not having to say, this VM, that VM, someone's created a VM, so an admin has to go in and add that to the job. We're just saying back it all up. We want to back it up. There's not going to be VMs in my environment that I want to be not backed up, so just go in there. We can also do it from a storage perspective, or any container, essentially, within the hypervisor. So if there's a logical separation, or we've got different departments, we've got test and dev as opposed to production, all of those kinds of things, we can obviously logically group how our VMs are backed up and when, and we can have great control over that. But there's a lot of power in just being able to say, just go out there, just back everything up, and just let me know if something goes wrong. It's a big departure. And then when you do run a job, if I want to know about it, I want to get some just useful information, right? So in this case, you can see the kind of timeframes that we're talking about, the amount of data that we're looking at, and you can see that the green data in the graph, that's the amount of data that's actually changed and is being read from the VM. The red data is the data that we've actually had to move. So again, talking about that efficiency and understanding how virtualization works, with our deduplication and compression and understanding of change while tracking, we're reading all these changes, but we're only moving a really small amount of data. And you can see again the kinds of time frames that are involved in a job there, backing up a couple of SQL servers, and that's a SharePoint server. The processing times are really short, and at the end we get some analysis to tell us how could we make that quicker if we wanted to. And we can see there that the biggest score that we got was 96% issue for our source storage, which means that immediately we could say, okay, is there anything that we can do with that source storage or how we're attaching to it to make that faster? So it's not just the backups are running slow, so the backups are running slow, that's it. It's the backups running slow, but Veeam's telling us that the reason for that is that it's waiting for our storage. So maybe that's something that we can address. In version 7, which is the latest version, we're also doing a whole bunch of parallel processing. So previously we might have processed one VM after another. Now we're able to allocate a bunch of resources and just say back up all of this stuff. As much as our resources can handle, just back up all of this stuff in parallel, which is just collapsing people's backup windows. So it's already very fast, but when we talk about during the job runtime, if we had enough CPU cores, all of those VMs and all of the disks of those VMs just backing up concurrently all at the same time, it's pretty neat.
With that parallel processing, you're talking about, because we're at version 7, well, I think we've got it already, but are you talking about, do you have multiple proxies, one proxy per backup job, or how does that actually work?
No, so on a proxy, what we used to have was the ability to have multiple jobs running at the same time, but within that job it would just process the VMs in a serial manner, one after another. Yeah. What it will do now is it will take, for every CPU core that you've assigned, a virtual disk. Mm-hmm. So in that instance, if there was 2 disks per VM, if we had 8 cores, it would start to process all of those disks all at once with a single proxy. So obviously it's something that you need to consider with your architecture, how you're designing it to make sure you're going to be able to deal with that, with the reading and the writing, and also on the proxy itself. And for that reason, if you do an in-place upgrade, it will have that turned off. So they've sort of made it so that you can upgrade safely in place, but you can then turn that functionality on. With a new install, it'll be turned on by default. So you'll get that parallel processing. So you can see there also just in that top summary information, we've had 10.5 gigabytes of changes, but through deduplication and compression, we're only moving 2.6 gigabytes. So again, getting that efficiency over the data. Now test and verify all my backups. So you've backed everything up, we're confident that at a top container level we're backing everything up, but I want you to verify them. I don't want you to just tell me that you've come up with some checksum number, or you've looked at the file, you think the file's good. I want you to actually test that the recovery is going to happen and that everything in those VMs actually works. So we can do that as well. After the backup runs, we can run a job called Assure Backup. And what that's going to do is it's actually going to mount up in an isolated environment all of those VMs without retrieving them from the backup file. So the backup file remains in a read-only state so that no corruption can take place. And within that lab, we can have testing which takes place against individual VMs, but also between the VMs in the lab. So maybe you've got a 3-part business system with AD, SQL, a web front end. We can have interaction between all of those servers, and then we can have a report sent back to us every single day which says, the VM is fine, the file was fine. The virtual machine started up and we got a heartbeat from VMware Tools. The operating system worked, all of the applications on the operating system worked, and now we've shut it down and put it back the way it was, and the backup file is in a read-only state, and it has been the whole time. So that's pretty powerful functionality. I mean, when we talk to people like how often do you test your backups, it's usually not very often. And then the form that backup test usually takes is to restore a single file from a tape. In most cases, that's considered a backup test, which might indicate that that file on that tape is okay, but maybe not much more than that. So pretty powerful. Tell me about exceptions. So of course, even though you've got everything's being looked after and you're confident that things are being backed up, you're confident now that you've got your verification, of course you want to know if something goes wrong. So you want to be equipped to have information landing in your inbox, for instance, or in a dashboard which tells you what kind of issues you've got. And that's where VM1 really comes to the front. So built into the product, you'll have that sort of standard email feedback, job completed, job had warnings. But if you want to talk about managing an infrastructure where you've got that sort of overarching look at a dashboard of successes, failures, what kind of issues are we seeing recurring, what kind of overall coverage do we have, that's where VM1 really comes in and sort of starts to offer up a bit more value in terms of being able to aggregate a lot of that data. So this is a really interesting report which you would probably generate every single day into somebody's mailbox. And it doesn't just tell us, did the backup jobs run, which is important, whether they were successful or not. But what it's actually telling us is, of the VMs that were backed up, based on when they were backed up, do they meet our restore point objectives? So, based on your scheduling, you may get all your backups complete, but you're still not getting all your backups less than 24 hours old. You're still not getting your backups less than 7 days old. So, being able to have that compliance piece is really important. And we can see here in our own environment, my laser's not working, I think the battery's flat, but we've got a large number of VMs which actually fall outside what we've designated as the RPO, which is 24 hours, and a certain number do. And obviously if we scroll down, we're going to be able to see the details of which VMs we're talking about, when they actually were last backed up, what the outcome of that backup was. So being able to get that feedback on where we would go to address that. Things like compliance in terms of how many restore points are we retaining, all of that kind of stuff. So if we're having a series of failures or sporadic failures for whatever reason, being able to understand what position does that put us in, where are we with our compliance at the moment. And again, being able to automate all of that, just have it arrive for somebody, takes care of a lot of that babysitting element. Someone's not having to sit and go through the console and say, okay, this job failed, I'm looking